Hello and welcome to the David Kurten Show here on today's News Talk TNT. Now, it has been 1 week since the implementation of the Public Order and Hate Crime Scotland Act, under which draconian new legislation has been made or put on the table, which will allow the police to investigate anybody who is complained about, who is making any statement online anywhere in the world that can be read in Scotland that someone feels is stirring up hatred. And in the week since it was implemented, I think the people of Scotland have done a marvelous thing. Over 8,000 complaints have been made under this new act, many of them against the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf himself, for his horrible anti-white speech 3 years ago. Police have been completely overwhelmed by complaints under the new legislation, with 8,000 of them being made. So what we have here is the police union bosses are saying that the law is a disaster and it is taking them away from frontline services and other things that they would like to do in terms of catching real criminals. And this is what I've always said: the police should be refocused on finding murderers and rapists and fraudsters and pickpockets and thieves and vandals and people who do assault, not on policing things on the internet which somebody somewhere doesn't like and feels is offensive. But they have been now overwhelmed by this, and hopefully this will then wake up some people in the police force themselves to realize that these draconian laws which are being imposed on society simply cannot be policed, and that they will just act on their own volition to stop investigating these things. But they have instruction from the SNP government in Scotland that they must investigate every single complaint that is made under this new law, and it simply is not possible to do so. Now, where the people of Scotland have been so good here is that they are filing all kinds of complaints which are completely ridiculous under normal circumstances, but this is an act of resistance. It is an act of defiance to make people realize that this kind of tyrannical law cannot be implemented and it cannot be sustained. So I hope that the people of Scotland will continue to go on making 8,000 or more complaints every week about this, which is over one a minute, until the law falls under its own weight. But there was a very interesting story in the papers today about one particular complaint that was made by a woman against something that was posted online, which had a swastika inside the Star of David, the Star of Remphan, whatever you like to call it, the six-sided figure which is on the Israeli flag. And the words next to this star, this pattern, were Nazism equals Zionism. Now, the woman complains that this was an anti-Semitic trope, an anti-Semitic post on social media. The police looked at this, and after an hour, they decided that they're not going to investigate. And the reason that was given in the newspaper piece about this was because they asked the woman whether she was Jewish or not to be offended by this. And she said, no, I'm not Jewish. And then they said, well, we're not going to investigate this because you're not Jewish and you're complaining about anti-Semitism. Now, this is a very bizarre incident, because what this means here is that they will investigate some things on not on the basis of what is the supposed offense, but on who makes the complaint about the offense, which is a complete inversion of what the law should be. Either something is objectively wrong, objectively unlawful, therefore they will investigate it anyway, or it's not. They shouldn't be deciding what to investigate in terms of the characteristics of the person who makes the complaint. And this is the problem with this particular law, is that if you are Jewish or Muslim or transgender or homosexual, you can make a complaint. But if you are not in any of those characteristic groups, you can't. So it gives extra power to complain and to bring people through the justice system to certain people in certain character groups. And this is completely wrong. Now, we already have laws like this, which go way too far in the first place. There is the Public Order Act 1986, brought in under Margaret Thatcher, surprisingly, that first introduced the concept of race and religious hatred into law. That was then strengthened by the Race and Religious Hatred Act of 2006 under Tony Blair. You have the Communications Act of 2003, and latterly the Online Safety Act of 2023. All of these things introduced the concept of hate crime, stirring up hatred into law, and made that concept even more draconian as the years have gone on. But this particular act in Scotland goes way, way further than even those terrible laws have done. What we need to do is get rid of the concept of hatred in law completely and go back to objectivity. So we can't have all of these crazy situations where the police are investigating things where they should be actually investigating real crimes rather than hurty words on the internet. This is today's News Talk, TNT.
It's the stuff.
What citizen wouldn't want to make American great again?
People are talking about.
Vilifying MAGA, it's just not going to work.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
You're watching the David Kurten Show on today's News Talk, TNT, and Gemma Cooper is with me, as always. Welcome to the show, Gemma.
Hello there. Yeah, my job here with you to take a look at the UK headlines. And funnily enough, just an hour ago on the Sonia Poulton show, I was discussing that very story, David, that very story, that exact same story that that hate crime was reported officially at the weekend, and that she was told, well, you're not Jewish, so therefore it can't be a hate crime. It doesn't fall under the parameters. I do rather wonder if the Scottish Police Scotland are heaving a sigh of relief that there are these parameters where they can say to certain people, no, we're not going to do that. I don't think that the Police Federation Scotland ever wanted this crime bill to be brought in the first place. They said it was a recipe for disaster, and 8,000 complaints, as you rightly say, within the first week. Where will this lead? It will lead to desk-bound officers investigating report after report after report. And of course, the system's wide open for abuse, isn't it? You can look at friends and family that you may have fallen out with, go and look at their posts, claim a hate crime if you don't think one of them is particularly nice, not necessarily about you, but something they might have posted about politics or world affairs. It's really a recipe. It is a recipe for disaster. And that recipe is being stirred up now. And it's cooking nicely in the oven, I think, for Hamza Youssef, that it's rather backfired, I think. And obviously the point you very rightly make about only certain groups have the ability to report hate crime. Well, that makes a mockery of it then, doesn't it? If you're not in a certain group, you can't be offended, you can't be upset, you can't, women being the main one I'm thinking of here, completely left out of the hate crime law at a time when crimes and sexual harassment against women and girls are on all-time record high. So something there doesn't add up, does it?
Yeah, right, exactly, because the sex is not one of the characteristics where you're allowed to make a complaint under this law. I think you've got age, disability, sexual orientation, transgenderism or transgender identity, and race and religion, but not biological sex. So women or men, neither can make a complaint under this law in terms of you feel someone has said something that's stirring up hatred against either men or against women. So yeah, it's completely ridiculous that only certain groups can have this. And this drives the coach and horses through the principle of equality under the law, which we all understand is what we have. Scotland is not a common law jurisdiction, so it's a little bit different. It's a Roman law jurisdiction. But, in England, certainly we have the understanding of common law where you are equal under the law. There is equality under the law. And whatever law is made should be common to all, that you don't have special rights. Which, I believe in equal rights and equal opportunities, but not special rights to have more recourse to the law than other people. And that is what we have now in Scotland with this law. But we also have it in England under the laws that I mentioned before, the Race and Religious Hatred Act, the Public Order Act, and so on. So it is a problem in England and Wales, of course, which, is equal in law to England too.
Of course, but they haven't received as much high-profile publicity. There's
Mm.
fanfare of, the First Minister going on television and saying this is great. It's going to quell the tide of rising hatred around the world. This was this big flagship policy that was supposed to, show the world that this small country could take on hate. And it's backfired spectacularly already, and it remains to be seen what we'll be talking about this time next week, when it'll be 2 weeks since the bill was introduced. Where will it have gone since then? A number of complaints came in over the weekend about a local derby match between Celtic and Rangers because of songs that were maybe sung by the home crowd. This is where it's so ludicrous that songs that sung at a football match been sung for decades in a local derby. Football match is a pressure cooker valve release for certain tensions, personally and socially. Now that's going to be possibly constituted as hate crimes. That was a story I covered last week, and I'm going to go look at the detail of that after we come off air. But this is where it's going. Eventually nobody will say anything ever to anybody. But I don't think this law is going to work. I think it's failing already. I think, let's take this as a quiet victory coming in over the horizon for free speech. We're not advocating hate crime, but we are champions of free speech here on TNT, and I think people are realizing very, very quickly this is going to be too difficult to police, too difficult to monitor,
Absolutely,
too expensive for the police as well.
Yeah, and the encouraging thing about this is that there are a lot of police officers now speaking out against this, and I am no fan of the police and what they've done over the last 4 years in attacking lockdown protesters and so on. My attitude to them has changed a lot. I was brought up to respect the police and think well of them, but I don't do that for them in general now. But I mean, what this does show is that there are still quite a lot of individuals in the police force there in Scotland who have some common sense, who say this is completely ridiculous. It's impossible to police. It's overwhelming us. We're spending all of our time, or a significant proportion of our time, on policing these silly things on the internet, which we never went into the police force to do. And there are some genuinely good police officers who don't want to do this, and they actually want to go out and catch real criminals rather than spend their time logging details of complaints about hatred on the internet, which may just be, what you and I would consider has always been free speech and should remain free speech, and they don't want to do this. So yeah, I really hope that this does collapse under its own weight. It'll be found to be unworkable, and then ultimately this SNP will get kicked out of the ballot box, and Heritage Party or someone can replace them and repeal this law, and so this won't be a problem at all in the future.